Alrighty, howdy guys, it's Joshua J here, and today I'm going to be going over environment design tips. So some things that I think of when designing environments, and I did an environment now of like basically the one you're seeing in the background. It's a rock little village thing, like a village thing on a rock face side of a cliff. And I did the thumbnails a while ago, and I wanted to really do a good video that I hope that you guys can benefit a lot from. So I've made some notes, and let's get into it. This is environment design tips that we're talking about. Okay, so firstly, before you even start anything, you want to have like a clear direction of where you're going. So you want to have something, like a one-liner that's kind of going to drive you forward with whatever it is that you're designing. And it's basically just like having some sort of intention and some sort of focus before you really get into it. And having this is it's really gonna help you stay focused, So if you're designing like sci-fi, it's very different to designing something that's like medieval, right? So having a one-liner is just gonna keep you focused and remember what it is you're designing. Just so that like the story within the environment that you're designing is quite, it makes sense to the viewer. That's really what you want, and that's kind of the purpose of the one-liner. And also another purpose of having a one-liner is it kind of keeps, so it all feels kind of cohesive. Okay. After you've chosen your one-liner and you want to, then you can only start, then you obviously want to do some research and reference, finding like good solid research and reference like of existing elements, of existing environments that are close to the environment you're designing. And then also, combining it with existing artwork that you enjoy, that's also going to combine with it. So having both of those, like real reference, and then also having stylized reference or existing artwork. Okay. Then you want to move on to doing thumbnails, and you want to do like a bunch of these, like a whole bunch of them, as many as possible, and being like genuine about it, like seeing kind of what works and what doesn't. It's like working as a concept artist, you're always focusing on creating iterations, different ideas around one theme. Literally that summarizes concept art for you, like right there. Like literally different ideas within one theme. That is basically what concept art is. So that's kind of what you're aiming to do in your thumbnails. This is still blue sky phase, so you're moving, you're moving through each design, or each thumbnail, kind of like trying to create something new and unique, but while still keeping it, within that one-liner that you've got going there. This is also a good point for you to focus on your composition and your, like making sure that things read well, like having a nice composition, focusing on, like the rule of thirds, just kind of having your main focal point slightly off center, not directly in the middle, and also establishing your values. So you'll have seen in this example in the beginning of the video, I just was working in grayscale. So that's kind of really important to just make sure, that like you don't want to be laying down color too soon with thumbnails, just so you can focus on design. Okay, so it's really important to just focus on the layout, composition, and making sure your values are set up nicely before even diving into color at all. Okay, so by then, you have a good idea of like the impact of your image. The impact usually comes within your thumbnails, okay? So like if your composition is strong and you're getting like good shapes and you can still explore it there because you're still in blue sky phase, then that's good, because then like you don't need to backtrack like way into your painting. So it's kind of like just making sure everything is working before you've even started rendering. Okay. Next thing is when you're still doing thumbnails, you can just focus on depth. So which elements are going to be in the foreground, which elements are going to be in the midground, and which elements are going to be in the back. So that's the reason for doing thumbnails. So you can just like focus on your composition, your values, and your depth. Okay. Now when I design environments, I like to use Blender and Photoshop. So combining the two often works really well for me. But there's a point where 3D stops working and kind of like hinders your progress. And the 3D, just remember, like combining the 2D and the 3D is just a tool to get you to your end product. It's not it's not necessarily going to be the finished thing. So it's just important to see it as a stepping stone rather than a final model. The reason why I say that is because I see many students, myself included, getting trapped in the Blender source in the 3D world, just trying to make their Blender model like so. They spend so much time, and it's almost like they're doing two pieces of art for one piece of art, if that makes sense. So they've got like their 3D model is like perfect, and then they now have to go and like redo it in 2D. You don't want to do that. So just some pointers for combining 2D and 3D. An important thing is like I use 3D for complex perspective. So I'm talking about like, let's say we want to do like a spiral staircase, or you want to do like the same, like stairs or planks of wood, like you can see in this design, that are like in perspective, but they're like the same object going in perspective. You could do it in 2D, it would be a lot harder to work out, but so 3D can kind of like save you in that way, just help you. So complex perspective is really good to use in 3D. And then also, I use 3D for working out very complex lighting. So you'll have seen, in the scene that I was building, this one, in this example here, I basically just put a sunlight in my Blender model, just at the top of my Blender model, just shining, in the direction that I wanted to cast shadow. Because the buildings on the side of that cliff face, there was a lot more going on. And if it's complex shadow groups, then Blender helps a lot with helping you work those out. Okay, so like if it's something simple, like just painting rocks or the form, it's not necessarily to like help you with form, it's just helping me with like more complex cast shadows, if that makes sense. And then another tip to think of is like storytelling. This is probably the biggest one out of all of them. Storytelling is the reason why we design environments, as concept artists, literally there to tell the story, right? So it's there to create something interesting, and also so like I said, like so that it makes sense. When you look at it, like when you're looking at your environment, thinking about things like how do the players or characters interact with this environment, like what's the logic of the structure of the story, where do they get water, like what's their lifestyle like, what's the feeling like, is it like a hostile environment, or is it sort of like a more homey, sort of like a nicer environment to be around. So it's important to think of the type of feeling you want to invoke when you're designing around here. That goes back to like thinking about the shapes that you're designing when you're doing environments. and you know how they affect the mood that's going to be going on in your environments. Okay, so the storytelling, you know, we want to create like designs and elements in our scene that make sense. And it's quite, you know, like if you're thinking about a story, it's kind of the solutions to all of your any problems you might have, or all the problems you might have. So it's like, you know, if you literally just think about like, oh, how do these people, you know, what do they eat? Are they like vegetarian? Do they fish? Okay, cool. So we'd probably see some like fishing rods, you know, or like what do they use for light? Maybe there's lanterns hanging around. Like how do they, you know, like how do they get around? Do they go by boats? Oh, okay, cool. So we'll probably see boats, you know, like little tugboats lying around. You know, that kind of thing. That's kind of what we want to think about. And you know, also another thing in storytelling is it interesting? So like, is this environment interesting? Like, it's cool to tell a story, but what's like unique about it? You know, like what's gonna make the viewer be like, wow, you know, like, oh, that's such an interesting design, or like, that's such an interesting way of like telling the story, or such an interesting pattern, you know, that's going on there. So just like something that's gonna make it interesting, that's not like completely obvious, you know. Then the next point, you know, in environment design tips is color balancing. So that's color's a whole thing on its own, but you know, you basically want your colors to harmonize, and the focal point to be, you know, you want to use color to try and direct the eye to the focal point. Okay, you know, we can also use color to establish depth, you know, so like on top of the values that we already set sort of in the thumbnail phase, or you know, after like doing our line art. But we can really use like once we've established our values, it's nice to create a lot of different colors, you know, and lots of different colors within the values that you have there. Then the last one is just talking about brush strokes for rendering. So, you know, like, it's great when you spend a lot of time with one brush, you know, then you really get to know where that brush works and where it doesn't work. You know, like, can this brush be used for rocks, or maybe this texture brush can be used for rocks, you know. So it's nice to spend a lot of time with a brush, so you really know how it works and where it works. And yeah, those are basically all my tips for environment design. This is a longer video than I anticipated, but I'm gonna let it just play in the background anyway, right up until the end, and you guys can just watch me finish off this painting. But I hope you guys have enjoyed this, and I will catch you guys in the next one.